The date is sometime around the year 30 AD, and the famous teacher and alleged prophet, Jesus of Nazareth, is brought before a Roman governor by a Jewish court called the Sanhedrin. Once again, this governor has the short end of the stick. While other governors have easy assignments across the empire, this one has the job of dealing with the religious zeal of Judea, the ones who refuse any other possible notion of God apart from their own. This Sanhedrin, who had been a useful Jewish ally and asserting Roman rule over the province, were now making their demand before the governor. Execute Jesus of Nazareth for sedition. Unconvinced, the governor asks why, to which they say he calls himself the king of the Jews and therefore denies the rule of Caesar. The governor still remains unconvinced. After all, so too did the Jews deny the rule of Caesar by refusing to believe in Emperor Tiberius' deity. The governor had tried hard to bring Judea under his thumb, and now all that hard work was at risk. In a desperate attempt to pacify the Sanhedrin, he said, one goes free. Jesus, or the terrorist, Barabbas. To his disappointment, the crowd shouts for Barabbas to be set free and for Jesus to be killed. Bereft of options, the governor washes his hands and declares no involvement with the upcoming execution of Jesus. Yet this decision had the exact opposite effect. Rather than being forgotten in history, he became better known than nearly all Roman emperors. Today we use both biblical and non-biblical sources to give you the full picture of who Pontius Pilate was.
Hello there.
Okay, so this video launches our new series, Aren't They Mentioned in the Bible, where we'll be looking at the lives of real historical figures that get biblical attention. These are coming out every third week, so leave a comment below with which of these should be next: King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, Cyrus the Great of Persia, or Herod Agrippa, Pilate's contemporary. So as we do with our ancient history videos, I'm going to begin by laying out the sources that we'll be using today. Firstly, we have the Jewish historian Josephus, who lived throughout the 1st century. Secondly, we have Philo, a Jew from Alexandria in Africa, who lived from 20 BC to 50 AD. Thirdly, we have the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then finally, we have the Pilate Stone, a stone found in Caesarea that bears Pilate's name. Now, it is important to note that when it comes to Pilate's life, some things we know because multiple sources say it, and then for others, we can actually use inductive reasoning and put some puzzle pieces together based on the sources, plus use what we know of Roman and Jewish practices from the time. So very little is known about Pilate's life prior to becoming the governor of Judea. Being of equestrian status, he was of mid-ranking nobility, and Judea wasn't exactly the most high-profile province to have under your control. And so though the sources don't say any of this, we can be about 85% sure that Pilate would have had military command before being the prefect of Judea, because Emperor Augustus established the cursus honorum, which made equestrians serve in the military before being prefect. And so Josephus says that Pilate was appointed the prefect of Judea from 26 to 36 AD, and this is broadly accepted, but some historians contest this, arguing for an earlier date of 18 AD. Now, this is a long time to be prefect, which is used as evidence by some to suggest that he was pretty competent. I personally think that's a bit of a stretch, but interestingly, Pilate didn't actually have total autonomy. He had to answer to the legate of Syria, but for Pilate's first 6 years of governing, the Syrian legate wasn't there, which gave him both difficulties, but also the freedom to be pretty harsh with the Jews. Pilate's entry into the governorship is also shrouded in a fascinating mystery. If, as Josephus argues, Pilate ruled from 26 AD onwards, well then Emperor Tiberius possibly didn't appoint Pilate to the position because he had retired to Capri in the same year. In Tiberius' absence, one of his Praetorian guards, Sejanus, administered the empire until he was implicated in a plot to overthrow Tiberius in 31 AD in order to be killed by the emperor himself. Given that 26 to 31 AD was Sejanus' era, some historians have speculated that it may have been him who appointed Pilate, and that Pilate's prestige suffered as a result of Sejanus' execution. Nonetheless, let's have a look at what we know about Pilate's reign as the prefect of Judea. Now, the Romans typically allowed annexed provinces to retain some degree of localized control. It's part and parcel as to why they survived so long. And so Pilate split power with the Sanhedrin. That's why the trial of Jesus was so messy, both were pointing the finger at each other, saying, you do it. It is also worth noting that Pilate had the power to fire and appoint the high priest of the Sanhedrin. A man by the name of Joseph ben Caiaphas was the high priest when Pilate came to power, and Pilate in fact kept Caiaphas, which suggests to us that he was a useful ally in exerting control over the Jews. Now, Pilate was a pagan and considered Judaism to be fairly uncivilized. As a result, his primary residence was over here in Caesarea, and only ventured to Jerusalem for major feasts and festivals to maintain order. The governors before him tended to do the exact same thing. And so Pilate had a few issues in managing the Jews. Firstly, he allowed Roman soldiers to enter Jerusalem without removing banners of Caesar. Previous governors had ordered soldiers to remove the banners because the second commandment was to not make an image of God, and with the Jews taking great offense to it, it risked civil unrest. Pilate brought the soldiers in at night time, which suggests he knew what he was doing, and as you might have guessed, there was unrest and a number of Jews surrounded Pilate's house for 5 days, until he backed down. Secondly, the next issue was to do with the Herods. So Herod the Great, who we see in the Christmas story, was what was called a client king and ruled on behalf of Rome even though he wasn't Roman. When Herod died, he had a deal with Emperor Augustus that his kingdom would be split into 4 and given to his sons. Most of the territory was given to his son Herod Archelaus, but he demonstrated himself to be very incompetent, and there was a revolt in 6 AD. Because of this, Augustus removed Archelaus and instead made it a direct province of Judea with a Roman governor. The other 3 Herodian areas were allowed to remain though. Basically, Pilate brought Roman gold shields into Jerusalem, placing them on Herod the Great's palace. The remaining sons who still had power petitioned Pilate to remove them, but Pilate refused. The sons then went to Emperor Tiberius, who angrily reprimanded Pilate and ordered him to remove the shields. Thirdly, Pilate used the temple treasury to build an aqueduct. This once again greatly annoyed the Jews who rioted, but Pilate put his foot down this time, ordering his soldiers to beat the crowd, with many Jews being beaten to death or trampled to death by soldiers' horses. In Luke 13, Luke says, "Now there was some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans, whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices." Now this could be an expression referring to this very event, or it could be an entirely unrelated event that isn't recorded in Josephus or in Philo. Now onto the bit we've all been waiting for. What role did Pilate play in the execution of Jesus of Nazareth? This is where most scholars would say there's something of a discrepancy between the account in the Gospels and the way that Josephus and Philo portray Pilate. According to the Gospels, Pilate was a weak governor who let the Jews take the front foot in killing Jesus. According to Josephus, Pilate was a brutal governor who violently suppressed the Jews. The hypothesis put forward is that the Christians were riding under the threat of the Roman Empire, and so they wanted to portray Pilate as innocent and heap guilt upon the Jews. I'm going to push back against that. Remember, Pilate was in Tiberius's bad books after the Herods went over his head to the emperor, and for his career, he really couldn't afford to aggravate the Jews any further. On top of that, Jesus was being tried during Passover, and Jews were coming from all across the Middle East and Africa to visit Jerusalem. Aggravating the Jews any further would have presented the risk of serious escalation. The Gospel writers also saw Jesus as fulfilling centuries-old prophecy from Isaiah. In reference to the coming Messiah, Isaiah 53 says, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted." The Gospel writers saw the fulfillment of the messianic prophecy as the Jews killing their Messiah, and so in writing the theological story, they placed emphasis on the role of the Jews in killing Jesus. According to the Gospels, Pilate probably ordered Jesus' arrest anyway. In John 18, John mentions that Judas led Roman soldiers to Jesus. And then finally, the Gospels still show Pilate's disdain for the Jews. In an effort to mock both Jesus and the Jews, in John 19, John claims that Pilate gave Jesus the title of King of the Jews, and when the Jews asked for the sign to be taken down, Pilate refused, saying, "What I have written, I have written." For me, the 2 sets of accounts of Pilate are completely consistent. After the death of Jesus and with the explosion of Christianity that came later, and also with the fact that Tiberius was now gone, Pilate reverted to brutality. According to Josephus, a group called the Samaritans who were from northern Judea went looking for artifacts believed to be buried by Moses near Mount Gerizim. No one knows whether or not they were armed, but Pilate slaughtered them. Remember, Pilate actually had to answer to the governor of Syria, as Judea was considered an extension of that province. The Samaritans appealed to the Syrian governor, claiming that they were not in fact armed, something a number of historians dispute. Like I said, Tiberius was gone, and in his place, a new emperor was on the throne. That man was the notorious Caligula, and he immediately recalled Pilate from Judea in 36 AD. After that, Pilate vanishes from the record. Thanks for watching. I've got a challenge for you this week. Comment below with your fan fiction for what happened to Pilate after he was recalled by Caligula. The winner will feature in a future episode when we revisit this fascinating figure of history. It doesn't have to be long, just leave a comment for a shot to win. We can't wait to see you next time for our next venture into a fascinating part of history.